Dear ladies and gentlemen, my name is Lena Bartosson and I am very pleased to welcome you all to this seminar that will deal with the European security challenges seen from a NATO perspective. During this spring, we have talked a lot about the developments in Russia, Russian military exercise patterns, violations of Swedish borders, Swedish defense capacity, even the strategic value of the Isle of Gotland, and the information operations. We all agree on the fact that the European security order has severely been challenged. Next week, the Swedish Parliament will vote on the defense bill that will cover the period 2016 to 2020. Key priority is to enhance the warfighting capability of the armed forces and develop a new total defense concept, which includes both military and civilian defense. A cornerstone remains, of course, the need for bilateral and multilateral cooperation. The partnership with NATO is very important, and the new Enhanced Opportunities Programme adopted at the summit in Wales last year opens up for deeper cooperation with the alliance. In light of this and the security situation, not the least in the Baltic Sea region, it is indeed important to be in tune with how NATO assesses the situation and how the alliance is facing the challenges. Today's seminar will focus on this. FOF, or Folk och Försvar, is delighted to have the Deputy Secretary General, Mr. Alexander Versbow, with us today, who will elaborate on this theme. Mr. Versbow took up his position in February 2012 after serving for 3 years as a U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs. Before that, he was a career member of the U.S. Foreign Service, and as such, he served, among other things, as ambassador to NATO, to the Russian Federation, and to the Republic of Korea. After Mr. Versbow's initial presentation, we will listen to 2 reflections from a Swedish perspective. We have Peter Eriksson, who is the head of the Security Policy Department at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, with us. And we also have Johan Lagerlöf, who is the Defense Policy Director at the Ministry of Defense. We will conclude with a joint discussion in which I hope that you would actively like to take part in. The seminar is streamed live on Folk och Försvar's website, so we need to use the microphone at all times. Now, with these words, I would like to welcome you all again to this seminar, and an especially warm welcome to Ambassador Alexander Versbow. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much, Lena. And thank you for that kind introduction. Thank you for the invitation to come here, because it's a pleasure to be with you today, and especially to be here at the Museum of Mediterranean and Near Eastern Antiquities. Not a little classier than the usual setting for discussions of NATO affairs. And in fact, this magnificent place connects us to our past, a past that stretches back millennia. It celebrates some of mankind's great early civilizations. The relics in this museum and the stories that go with them have inspired generations to achieve remarkable things. But they're also a stark reminder of the dangers that our modern civilization faces. For across Iraq and Syria, the barbarians have returned. In places like Mosul, Hatra, and Palmyra, in addition to murdering people, the terrorists of ISIL are destroying humanity's heritage on an epic scale. Along with weak and failing states in North Africa and the Middle East, this is creating enormous pressure on our southern neighborhood, with millions of displaced people seeking shelter in neighboring countries and across the Mediterranean in Europe, not to mention the ongoing threat of terrorist attacks on the streets of our own nations. So these are very serious issues warranting serious discussion, but they're not the only challenges we face. Today I'm going to look not so much to the south, but to the east, to Russia. Last year, Russia did something that no other European country has done since the Second World War. It took part of another sovereign nation by force. With its illegal occupation of Crimea and its ongoing aggression in eastern Ukraine, Russia is undermining decades of work by the international community to create a Europe whole, free, and at peace. And it is violating the principles of our international rules-based system: respect for borders, the equality of nations, and the settling of disputes by peaceful means. It is jeopardizing a system that has brought unprecedented peace, security, and prosperity to countless millions of people around the world, and it's threatening to return to the days of spheres of influence. NATO allies do not and will not recognize the annexation of Crimea. We believe that the full implementation of the Minsk agreements represents the best hope for peace in Ukraine, and we continue to urge all parties to do everything in their power to meet their commitments, especially the ceasefire and the withdrawal of heavy weapons. Russia is a full party to the conflict, and it's a signatory of the Minsk agreements. It therefore carries special responsibility to stop the violence, to withdraw its forces, to halt its arms supplies to the separatists, and to move from confrontation back to cooperation. Now, this new situation is certainly not what any of us wanted. For a quarter of a century, since the end of the Cold War, we worked very hard to include Russia, not to isolate her. We wanted a strategic partnership based on mutual interest, on shared values, and on the creation of a brighter future for us all. To this end, the international community expanded the G7 to become the G8 and invited Russia to become a member of the World Trade Organization. At NATO, we gave Russia a position of privileged access and influence, unmatched in our history. We created the NATO-Russia Council and offered to work together on missile defense. We cooperated in areas such as counterterrorism and combating piracy off the Horn of Africa. And we worked together to bring peace and stability to the Balkans and to Afghanistan. This cooperation benefited NATO and it benefited Russia. It brought us a stable Europe, and it brought Russians greater security and prosperity than ever before. But regrettably, it appears that Russia has chosen a different path. I certainly hope that one day we can again be partners with Russia, but that day seems to me to be a long way off. President Putin has chosen anti-Western rhetoric and nationalist self-assertion as the basis for his regime. He has sought to justify Russia's aggressive actions on the basis of a false narrative of Western encirclement. And this isn't going to be easy to change, so we must stand by our principles and prepare ourselves for the long haul. Now, at NATO, we are responding to the challenges from the East and from the South. At our summit in Wales last year, we reaffirmed our commitment to Article 5 of our founding treaty, which says that an attack on one ally is an attack on all. And we agreed to implement the largest increase in our collective defense, in our defense posture, since the Cold War. The centerpiece of the Wales Summit, the Readiness Action Plan, or the RAP, has already led to a far more visible military presence in NATO's eastern allies, with a larger air policing operation, greater troop numbers on the ground, and an increased maritime presence in the Baltic and Black Seas. We're setting up local command centers in the territory of the 6 Eastern allies, and we're doubling the size of our NATO response force, with a spearhead force able to respond to a crisis in any part of the alliance at very short notice, within a couple of days. We're keeping NATO strong because we believe that this is the best way to deter aggression and to protect our allies against any threat. But keeping NATO strong is also the best basis on which to engage with Russia and the best way to support our partners, vulnerable partners like Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, and also strong partners like Sweden. Now, as you all know, Sweden is one of NATO's most active, engaged, and effective partners. Sweden and NATO share the same values, the same commitment to democracy, human rights, the rule of law, and to the United Nations. And we share the same dedication to building a safer and more secure world. To this end, Swedish troops have stood side by side with NATO troops in our NATO-led UN-mandated operations in Kosovo, Afghanistan, and in Libya. Time and again, Sweden has demonstrated the effectiveness of its partnership with NATO. The speed with which Sweden has been able to respond is due to many years of close cooperation and interoperability with NATO forces. Over time, our dialogue and cooperation have grown, with regular political consultations on common security concerns. Our militaries work closely together, with Sweden making a significant contribution to training, education, and exercises, to the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security, and to many other partnership activities. This closeness was recognized at last year's NATO summit, when Sweden became one of the first nations to receive what we call enhanced opportunity partner status. Now, this is not an attempt at membership by the back door. Membership is something separate, and it remains a matter for the Swedish government and the Swedish people alone to decide whether you wish to follow that path. But enhanced opportunity partnership is an opportunity for deeper, more significant, and more tailored cooperation, both practical and political, to share intelligence, to consult politically, to develop a shared assessment of the challenges we face, and to consider further joint work to address those challenges. And that is essential if we're to maintain and strengthen the interoperability of our forces. Enhanced opportunity partner status also means greater access to exercises, evaluations, and training. Right at this moment, Sweden is taking part in the annual Baltops maritime exercise, the largest exercise in the Baltic Sea this year, including ships from 17 countries. Looking to the future, in 2018, Sweden and Finland will take part in NATO's high visibility exercise in Norway, and is already engaged in the planning and preparations for that. All of these exercises are held with the utmost transparency, I should add. You can read the schedule of our planned exercises on the NATO website, and each one is in line with all of our international obligations. This level and degree of cooperation is essential given the challenge of a newly aggressive Russia. For Russia is also holding military exercises, but theirs are a little bit different. Russia uses loopholes in the provisions of the Vienna document, the agreement that should ensure openness and transparency of exercises, in order to avoid notifying us of the largest military exercises that have taken place in the post-Cold War era. 3 of Russia's no-notice SNAP exercises have included over 80,000 troops. One of these exercises, in February of last year, was used to deploy forces to annex Crimea. It was used as the cover. And other exercises have masked support to separatists in eastern Ukraine and have led to the buildup of forces on Ukraine's border. So this is typical of Russia's so-called hybrid warfare, using all the military and non-military means at its disposal to achieve its objectives. In Ukraine, it has used proxy soldiers, unmarked special forces, intimidation and propaganda to create confusion and to obscure its true purpose, all within a cloak of deniability, although I have to say that cloak is getting thinner and thinner. So we have to be ready to deal with every aspect of this new reality, and that means working closely with allies and with like-minded partners to decide how best to prepare for, to deter, and if necessary, defend against hybrid threats. Just a few years ago, Sweden and the Allies enjoyed a benign security environment in the northern region. But we have to recognize that this has now changed. Sweden, for its part, has responded with an increase in its defense budget by investing in new defense capabilities and by increasing its cooperation with its northern neighbors, including allies like Denmark, Norway, and the Baltic states. More interaction with NATO can also increase Sweden's security. Now, recent Russian behavior is provocative and destabilizing, and it's only by cooperating closely, by sharing our insights, and by being strong and by standing up to Russia that we can hope one day to encourage Russia to return to its rightful place at the international top table. Sweden, of course, is a member of the European Union, and closer partnership between the EU and NATO is an area long championed by your country, and we're grateful for your efforts to bring our two institutions closer together. These past few years, the relationship between NATO and the EU has continued to strengthen. We've held more regular political consultations, including on the situation in Ukraine. We have cooperated in operations, including in the Western Balkans, and in the fight against piracy, and we have worked together to improve our capabilities by encouraging pooling and sharing and more multinational projects. But given the scope and the complexity of the challenges before us, I feel that we must do more. We must demonstrate even more unity of purpose between NATO and the EU, especially as we deal with hybrid threats and efforts to destabilize our neighbors. The countries of the Western Balkans, Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova all aspire to a European future. NATO is working with these countries to reform their defense sectors and to build effective armed forces. I hope there will be a role, too, for Sweden to help here, both directly and through complementary activities within the EU framework. We're also helping those countries that wish to move towards the possibility of NATO membership. For instance, by the end of this year, NATO foreign ministers will assess Montenegro's reform progress with a view to deciding whether to invite that country to join the alliance. The European Union is helping these countries too, helping them to stay on the path of democratic reform, to open up their economies, and to build effective institutions. Together, we're helping our eastern neighbors to become stronger, more resilient, and more able to chart their own course. This is our moral duty, and it's also in our own strategic interests. The same logic applies to our southern neighbors. By complementing and reinforcing each other's efforts, NATO and the EU can help them to become stronger, better able to look after their own security, and better able to project stability in their own region. So there's a lot more that NATO and the EU can do, and we're discussing how we might work more closely together in areas such as countering Russian propaganda, defense capacity building, maritime security, and cyber defense. And we look forward to Sweden's contribution to this broader NATO-EU agenda. So, ladies and gentlemen, the reason Sweden is such a close and long-standing partner of NATO is not simply because we face the same challenges, but because we share the same values. We're all committed to maintaining a Europe that is peaceful, prosperous, and free. We're all committed to democracy, to human rights, and the rule of law. And we know that we're far more likely to protect all of these things if we work together. NATO-Sweden cooperation is definitely a win-win situation for us all. It's a way for Sweden to make a major contribution not just to its own security, but also to global peace and stability, in full respect of Sweden's tradition of non-alignment. So I look forward to our continued active engagement in the years ahead, and I look forward to participating in the discussion after we hear from our Swedish colleagues. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for an interesting presentation, and we look forward to having you up here very soon again, so we can ask some questions as well. Now I would like to welcome Peter Eriksson and Johan Lagerlöf. Peter Eriksson from the Ministry for Foreign Affairs and Johan Lagerlöf from the Ministry of Defense. Welcome up here, and you will have around 10 minutes each for elaborating a little bit on Sweden's contribution, having heard now how NATO assesses the situation. A warm welcome to the both of you.
Thank you. Thank you to Lena and Folkeförsvar for organizing this event, and thank you very much to Ambassador Verspau for this very interesting and thoughtful introduction to the discussion today. Obviously, there could be a very large overlap with what I could say and what the ambassador just did, but I will try to focus on sort of some of the Swedish aspects, and specifically the sort of foreign policy aspects, security policy, and Johan will sort of take his angle to this. So let me start on Europe Day of 1994, 9th of May. That's when the then foreign ministers of Sweden and Finland almost literally hand in hand walked into the NATO headquarters for the first time and signed the PFP framework document. I don't think that anybody at the time could have foreseen what Partnership for Peace would actually develop into. But we were not alone in joining. In fact, all the participating states of the OSCE were invited, and one by one they also joined PFP in short order. Since then, Sweden has participated in practically all, or let's say all major peace support operations that NATO has conducted, starting with IFOR in Bosnia in 1995, I believe, continuing with SFOR, with the KFOR in Kosovo, with ISAF in Afghanistan, and also Unified Protector above Libya. And all of this resulted in a very large degree of interoperability, the ability of working together between Swedish armed forces and allied forces and other partner countries' forces in all those places, but also a habit of political consultations between Sweden and other partners on the one hand, and NATO concerning the security issues of the day. In fall of 2011, it had been decided that ISAF would wind down by the end of 2014. And we were starting to think between my department and Johan's department about how Sweden, in the new situation without any joint operations in the field with NATO, how we could be able to maintain and preferably also develop the interoperability and the political relationship that we had developed with NATO. We sort of listed our different ideas and basically created a one-page non-paper for our own sort of roadmap for the future partnership. The first bullet point was the idea of differentiation. That was at the time a bad word in NATO. It was not seen as the right way to go. How could you differentiate between different partners? Well, our idea was that our partnership with NATO shouldn't be defined by what NATO was prepared to do with Kazakhstan or what, let's say, Armenia was prepared to do with NATO. It should be based on what, in our case, Sweden would be able to offer, and also what requirements we had from NATO, and obviously from NATO's side the same thing. That is sort of the basic concept that underlies the Enhanced Opportunities Partnership. So there are 5 countries now that NATO recognizes actually as being special partners. It's not a group, because we are very different in between ourselves. So Georgia, Jordan, Australia, Finland, and Sweden. Clearly, with Finland, we have lots in common. Ever since that day in 1994, Sweden and Finland have been consistently trying to contribute to and to develop the partnership to a large extent together. And there are numerous Swedish-Finnish non-papers along the way. So a small group of 2 is fairly similar, but for the other 3, obviously they will develop their own relationship with NATO, tailor-made for them. So this is sort of one development that's directly connected to NATO that we have seen over the last 2 decades or so. In parallel, some other things have happened. The whole idea of cooperative security that was developed, I mean, starting maybe from the Helsinki Final Act and those principles, but in particular the Charter of Paris in 1990, the creation of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the whole idea that the Cold War ideological antagonistic relationship between the West and the East had ended, the end of history. Everybody agreed that democracy, human rights, rule of law, market economy was the way to organize the society. And in security, we focused on peacekeeping further and further away, let's say, and confidence and security building measures, verification, transparency, and all these wonderful things. Sweden became EU members in 95. Globalization happened all over the world, so to speak. And I would sort of, if 94 was, and of course 1st of January 95 with the EU membership as important dates, I would then pick up 2009 as another very important year, at least. What happened in 2009 was that Europe agreed on the Treaty of Lisbon. Our parliament ratified it. And at the same time, or at least the same year, Parliament also approved the Unilateral Declaration of Solidarity. The Treaty of Lisbon contains this Article 42.7, which says that an attack on one EU member state is considered an attack on everybody, and that it should be met with all necessary means. The Declaration of Solidarity says that Sweden, for its part, not just being sort of legally bound by the treaty, that we will also not be passive if an EU member state or another Nordic country were the object of a disaster or an attack. And we obviously also expect those countries to react in the same way. Therefore, Sweden should be able to give and to receive military and civilian assistance. Article 42.7 is very specific that for EU member states that are also allies, which happen to be 21 out of 28, that sort of defense of each other will actually be conducted in the framework of NATO. But probably we must assume that if we are to support another EU member state, it will also be in some kind of partnership with NATO, because practically all our neighbors are also NATO allies. Now, I would like to make one point before we continue on this line, and that is that I think that what we did in 2009, both the Lisbon Treaty and the Declaration of Solidarity, it's not those documents or that declaration that sort of commits us to supporting our neighbors. I think it's an issue of enlightened self-interest, in the sense that we are so intimately bound with our neighbors, in both, of course, politically as EU members, but also economically, that it's absolutely inconceivable that an attack against one country wouldn't affect us all very seriously. That, of course, is also part of what the Defense Commission always says, and is part of the Swedish doctrine as well. And these situations have to be met in cooperation with others. So, for the first 2 decades, the political and military cooperation that we developed with NATO was focused on peace support operations. But as Ambassador Versbau just described, over the last 18 months or so, Russia's behavior has shocked us all. We didn't expect it because we thought that the European security order and the rules-based security order that we had developed and all agreed on would actually hold up. And once again, citing the Defense Commission, there is a strong consensus in Sweden now, as you all know, that we have to refocus on strengthening our national defense in a regional context. And I'm sure Johan will elaborate on this shortly. One, we need the cooperation with NATO to exercise and develop our forces. We cannot do that sort of nationally on our own. Advanced large-scale exercises take place together with other countries, and these are allies, and that's organized in a NATO framework. So that's number one. And number two, if we are going to give and to receive military assistance, clearly that is also going to take place in a NATO framework. So does that mean that we are practically NATO members, or that we have this backdoor that we can sneak into? Well, I agree with Ambassador Versbau, there are no backdoors. There is just sort of the front gate. But the only limitation that we see for the development of the partnership, that is to enter into mutual defense guarantees. For the rest, it's a matter of what we, Sweden, believe is in our interest and the needs that we have and what NATO is prepared to do together with us, so to speak. The issue of whether we should enter the front gate is an ongoing political debate, which will be handled by others than by us. But clearly, the Enhanced Opportunities Partnership opens so many possibilities to cooperate and to develop both our political and military cooperation to meet any future contingencies, and also together if Sweden and NATO would so decide in the specific case. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Peter Eriksson. And now we give the word to Johan Lagerlöf from the Ministry of Defense. Please, we look forward to your reflections. No. Is it green? No, on. So.
Okay. Is it working now?
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, I'll try to add on to what Peter said and start with to thank for the overview the ambassador gave, and I think we share the view that you expressed on the current security challenges for Europe, and we face them to the south and we face them to the east. And I think both our ministers have been very clear in their language how they view the Russian actions in regards to the illegal annexation of Crimea and the activities inside Ukraine. So this underlines the need for unity and cooperation among European states and a strong transatlantic link. And Lena also mentioned the new defense bill, so I won't bore you with going through all the details, but just to point out, this is really something new. It's a new trend, and this is a result of the deterioration of the security situation. I think it's a clear link, which is worth noting. And one notion in the defense bill is, as Peter mentioned, this leaving this idea of focus on expeditionary forces to a more national, regional focus for our forces. And before I go into NATO, just to highlight that we work together with Finland in a new path. We also try to develop our cooperation with the other Nordic states. Like to emphasize Denmark, which we share geography and challenges in the south of the Baltic Sea. Also reaching out to Poland. We have also discussions with Poland, and hopefully we will have some sort of agreement with Poland in early spring. And as mentioned, the Baltic countries and other countries in Northern Europe. And of course, not forgetting the transatlantic links and the links to the US and Canada. In all this, of course, the partnership with NATO is very essential. And NATO is at the core if you develop military capabilities, and also the role model how you conduct international crisis management. We rely on technical standards, staff routines, procedures, methods, etc. Regardless who is the responsible for the operation, that will be used or conducted in the standards we have learned from NATO. So for us now, and we have heard about the contributions we have made and what we have also got back, obviously, from NATO. The Enhanced Opportunities programs provides with new possibilities. And I would like to mention, before I go into EUP, the host nation support agreement we signed at the WAVE Summit in September, which is now being processed in the government offices, and we look forward to a decision in Parliament in spring next year. So that obviously will be a foundation for all activities from conferences to exercises and to other things if you want to give and receive military help. I think the whole idea of EUP to be able to better assess situation, prepare for acting, and act together. It's to sum up what EUP is about. So I think it's a win-win prospect, both for NATO and for the partners concerned, the 5 partners. For us, it's natural to work very closely hand in hand with Finland when we develop the Enhanced Opportunities program. I will try to go through some of our priorities, how we would like to see this, what we do today, and how it will develop. Exercises is maybe the main thing for us now on the defense side. As we speak today, we had the Bolt-Ops, which has been widely covered in media, I believe. We have had anti-submarine warfare exercise, Dynamic Mongoose, in May. We have had a big air exercise in the north, in the same context. It's not a NATO exercise, but still. And we prepare to participate on this high level for the coming years. The ambassador mentioned the high visibility exercise 18, where we as a EUP nation together with Finland are involved in preparing the exercise from planning process very early in the planning process, which is something we really welcome and of great value for us. And that will be conducted mainly in Norway, so it's in our neighborhood. Could be a possibility to also exercise host nation support, etc. So we're trying to build on that. The exercises, of course, is something you need to exercise to get to ensure your interoperability. But it's also a political signal. When I started at the MOD, the first tasking I was given by my former boss was to be the desk officers for PFP exercises, which was seen as the most junior task you would get a newcomer. But that's not the case anymore. It's very high on the political agenda due to the signals you send and you like to send, that we are preparing together. We like to show solidarity and show unity of effort and ability to act together if needed. And I think the ambassador made a very valid point on the transparency we have in how we exercise and conduct our exercises. That's not always the case for some nations. I would also like to mention the defense capacity building, which we traditionally have been involved in supporting many nations that now are members of NATO and EU. And we look forward to continue with that, hopefully in the Nordic, Baltic as a core, but that will also support to the efforts by NATO and other organizations. The ambassador also made a point on EU-NATO cooperation. There is there is more to be done, but I believe that we have actually, the situation is much better than it was a few years ago, and we are by no means a problem in that process, I think. But I think the key to make this cooperation really fluent is the 22 nations members of both organizations. I think I'll stop
Okay,
there.
thank you very much, Johan. I would now like to welcome Ambassador Worsbo up here so we can start our discussion with the three of you.
Okay, just putting this wonderful thing back on. Okay. Where should I go? Up here?
Yeah.
Okay. Make a little. Thanks.
So thank you very much, Peter Eriksson and Johan Lagerlöf. Indeed. We will soon open up for questions, so you can start thinking about tricky questions to these three gentlemen up here. I would like to start by asking Ambassador, we have talked a lot about Russia now, and that is clearly in the focus here in Sweden, but how would you describe the main challenge in the whole NATO? Where is this Russia problem? Because you also mentioned Syria and all the other challenges that are really very high on the agenda as well.
Yeah. Well, I think in terms of the challenges to our security writ large, it's hard to decide whether Russia is the bigger threat or whether the challenges posed by ISIL and the spreading instability and violence, breakdown of the whole Arab state system, which is more a serious challenge in the long term. I think right now we have a clear sense in NATO of what we need to do vis-a-vis Russia. There's the Readiness Action Plan and all the related efforts to strengthen our own defenses and to strengthen the resilience of neighbors whose sovereignty is being threatened by Russia. And there's, of course, a lot of work to be done there, and it is, as I was saying earlier, a collective effort that involves partners, the European Union, as well as the allies themselves. Where NATO's role will be in dealing with the threat from the south is still evolving. I think the most likely emphasis for NATO will be in what we call defense capacity building, helping build the strength of the societies, the defense institutions, helping promote defense cooperation among some of the states of the Middle East and North Africa, helping perhaps even the African Union, which is developing a regional peacekeeping capability. These are all efforts that are now evolving, but NATO may not be as much of the central player vis-a-vis the South as it is vis-a-vis the East. The EU is just as engaged in this capacity building and promotion of reforms in the Middle East and North Africa. So, as I said, that's a strong argument for closer NATO-EU collaboration. And then member states, led by my country, the United States, which is leading the coalition against ISIL, is in charge of a kind of more comprehensive look, aiming at influencing the military situation on the ground, but training and equipping Iraqi forces and moderate Syrian opposition forces, but also working to deal with the roots of the crisis, including countering the extremist narrative that is unfortunately bringing about more recruits for ISIL, even from our own countries, addressing the economic degradation, which is creating the fertile ground for radical ideas. That kind of goes beyond NATO's remit, but it's just as important work as what we're doing vis-a-vis Russia.
Well, some European countries, they are suffering severely because of the financial crisis, and we have also seen that some of these countries are aiming at improving their bilateral relations with Russia. Do you see that as a problem, and how is this affecting the cooperation within NATO, but also within EU, if Peter Eriksson or Johan Lagerlöf would like to reflect on that, please?
Well, first of all, the big challenge in overcoming the financial crisis relates to defense budgets. All the good things that we're trying to do with our Readiness Action Plan depend on nations devoting more resources to defense. The days of doing more with less are now over. And allies made a pledge at the summit last year in Wales to increase spending. And the results thus far are mixed, shall we say. But hopefully by the time of our summit next summer in Warsaw, we can see a more positive picture. But the continued financial challenges do potentially offer the Russians opportunities to sow divisions among the members of NATO and the members of the EU. So far, though, I've been impressed by the united front, by the unity that has been displayed in the face of the continuing aggression by Russia. In particular, the decision taken by the European Council a few months ago to link the full implementation of the Minsk agreements to the lifting of sanctions. Partial, selective implementation isn't good enough. The full implementation is the key. That was given further impetus by the G7, and I hope that we'll see a continued united front when it comes to the sanctions, which are the main instrument that we have for raising the costs to Russia for its aggression. So there's a potential problem there, but I'm not yet alarmed.
Okay. Peter Eriksson, would you like to add anything?
No, thanks to Ambassador Verspa for basically saying what I intended to say. Of course, we all would like good relations with Russia, so that's not the point in itself. I think what's is most important is the unity that the European Union, from our case, but also NATO, but the unity specifically on sanctions that the European Union has shown, and I think it maybe even surprised ourselves. It certainly, I think, surprised President Putin.
Johan, would you like to add?
I agree. Unity. I still have a problem with my mic.
On the in one inside, yeah.
Unity is the key, and patience, I believe, and I would include also the EU, NATO, and keeping the transatlantic unity on this is essential.
Okay, let me just quickly ask you, Ambassador, the NATO-Russia Council, you mentioned about it. Is there any activity whatsoever in that council as of today?
Well, one-word answer is no.
Yeah.
Because the decision we took at the level of our foreign ministers last April of 2014, to suspend all practical cooperation has led to a pretty static situation. The possibility of a NATO-Russia Council isn't excluded, because our policy last year was to keep diplomatic channels open. Secretary General Stoltenberg saw Foreign Minister Lavrov a few weeks ago at Lavrov's request, although it was not, I have to admit, a very productive meeting. But I think a lot of allies are questioning what can be achieved in a NATO-Russia Council meeting right now, when Russia is still kind of denying what is clear to everyone's own eyes, that their forces are engaged in combat in eastern Ukraine, that they're arming and training the separatists, and increasingly exercising command and control over the whole operation, yet pretending that these are just volunteers that over which they have no control. So the basis for cooperation and even for a serious dialogue is pretty shaky right now.
We'll open up for questions now, and we have one there, Mikael Salin first.
Thank you so much for a very interesting presentation. I have two things on my mind, having listened to you now. One is, when we talk about the cooperation between Sweden and NATO, I was asking myself, in your mind and in the Secretary's mind, is there a limit to cooperation between a country like Sweden and NATO, other than on the Article 5 security guarantee issue? And the second thing would be comparing good partners with difficult members. I am a former ambassador to Turkey, and they had their elections recently, as we know, and Turkey, of course, owns, in a way, the question of EU-NATO cooperation and its potential. It doesn't subscribe to sanctions among the EU states against Putin. It is reluctant, if I may say so, on the fight against the monster with many names, etc. So I guess from the NATO point of view, there is some, but they receive patriots for protection. So there is sort of a mixed picture. Is a difficult member state comparable to a very excellent partner?
Thank you.
Okay, the first question I'll start with is maybe an easier question. I think that I wouldn't say there's no limit, but there's certainly a huge scope for expanded cooperation between NATO and Sweden without crossing the line into territory relating directly to Article 5. And even there, we're working now, even as the emphasis in our defense planning has shifted away from expeditionary operations, crisis response operations, toward collective defense and Article 5 missions. We're still working very hard to ensure that Sweden's contributions to our NATO response force, which is a central part of our response to deterring Russia, can nevertheless be maintained. I think a key principle there is that for allies, partners can offer supplementary capabilities, and that may be something that would be very useful in a real crisis, because Sweden shares an interest in ensuring that the Baltic states remain independent and secure and are not attacked, not threatened. It's just that NATO can't plan on reliance on non-member forces. We have to have enough forces within the family to carry out the mission, and partners could offer supplementary capabilities. But beyond that, though, I think there's enormous scope, and we're trying to deliver on what we promised with this EOP program in terms of enhanced participation in exercises, continued role in the NATO response force, and the political side of that as well. Sharing intelligence, coming up with common assessments of the security situation in the Baltic region and Northern Europe, and maybe globally. So tremendous scope for the partnership. Second question raises some delicate issues. Turkey remains a very key ally, and they're, of course, on the front lines vis-a-vis all these horrible trends that we're grappling with to the south and to the southeast. And they have been big contributors to our operations in Afghanistan, where they're still the lead nation in the capital in defense of Kabul. Even as we've transitioned now to focus on training, they're still heading that part of the mission, and have contributed over the years to many of our operations. So yes, there are delicate issues that we have to address and sometimes finesse when it comes to keeping up the NATO-EU partnership, but there too, Turkey has been very pragmatic in the last year, and we just had two meetings of the North Atlantic Council with the Political and Security Committee of the EU, focusing on how we can cooperate more in dealing with the threats from the east and from the south. We're hoping that will evolve into a more coordinated approach to hybrid warfare, to strategic communications. So it's not as complicated as your question implies. But NATO's a democratic alliance, and we have to work on the basis of consensus, and that requires compromise from everybody. But I've always been impressed from my very first tour of duty at NATO back in the early 90s, later as ambassador 15 years ago, and now how allies recognize that NATO is too important to fail. That you have to come together and accommodate the different perspectives. And now with these epic challenges that we're facing, I think that the sense of resolve to find consensus on the important issues is stronger than ever.
Peter.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a small distinction here regarding whether there's a limit, and the limit being giving or receiving defense guarantees. That's the sort of speak this limit between Sweden and NATO. But Ambassador Versbauer mentioned the high visibility exercise in 2018 with a scenario where Norway is attacked. Clearly for allies exercise collective defense, Article 5. Sweden participating in that exercise to give support according to our doctrine. So NATO can work on Article 5 and we can, in sort of full coherence with our own doctrine and the policy of military non-alignment, contribute to that, well, both that exercise and should any sort of real life incident happen. But it would depend on our and NATO's specific decisions in that situation.
Johan, I would like to ask you, because Ambassador Versbo mentioned the supplementary capability that the partner countries can contribute with. What is Sweden's best supplementary capability that we can provide, in your view?
Well, I think we are a fact in the terms of geography. Sweden is where we are, and we so I think in the capability of having a strong defense force and protecting our borders and bringing stability is one thing that is in the interest of the alliance as well. Same idea with the cooperation with Finland to show that we are ready and able to act together if needed, whether it's in peacetime or in other scenarios. That's another way to show that we would like to contribute to the stability in our corner of Europe. And then if you can count airplanes and submarines, but that's
Which
not
we do.
the case. But yeah. But so I think we are seen, as the ambassador said, as a strong partner to NATO, and we with the new defense bill, I think that will be emphasized for the future. And just to add what Peter said, I think I have a long list of things that we have to but should develop according to the defense bill. Mentioned information exchange, surveillance, develop the political dialogue between European partners and the alliance. There are many things to do, which would not be Article 5, but there's a huge scope, and I think the ambassador also said that this gives the possibility to tailor-made cooperation between the alliance and a certain partner country. And I think in the days we have now, this is very important that we use this possibility, and we also have to deliver from our part, high priority from our side.
Thank you. Please.
Anke Schmidt-Wetzmann, Swedish Institute of International Affairs, and I'm focusing on especially EU, the EU perspective towards the Eastern Russia. And therefore I was particularly pleased with what you said, Ambassador, that there is an increasing effort between NATO and the European Union to develop a more concerted approach towards Russia and especially the war in Ukraine right now. And I would like to hear actually from all three a bit more in concrete terms how that development has taken place since early 2014. So if you could maybe exemplify, illustrate in what ways in practical terms you have moved forward, because before early 2014 I think there has not been that much of an effective cooperation. The second question I have is also related to the NATO-EU cooperation, and you mentioned there, Ambassador, that there's more cooperation in the areas of countering Russian propaganda. And I know that at NATO you already have developed the Stratcom approach, and there's also the special center in Riga now that is developing and up and running soon. I also wondered there, because the European Union is right now also trying to set up that better strategic information capacity, but how is that in practical terms being discussed from the NATO point of view? And also, since you highlighted that Sweden is playing a very important role within the European Union and as a non-NATO member state in promoting stronger links between NATO and the EU, in strategic communication, how are you working there? Because when I was recently in Brussels, it didn't sound very much like the cooperation between NATO and the EU in that particular field doesn't seem to have developed so far. Thank you.
Okay, well, let me say, my colleagues can maybe say more about the Swedish role. But what's been going on sometimes is not as visible, and maybe that's part of the reason why we're actually getting somewhere, because there are political sensitivities because of the unresolved issues relating to Cyprus, which do affect the institutional links between the two. But what we've done is stepped up contacts at every level between both the political leadership, between the NATO Secretary General, the High Representative on the EU side, and also with the President of the Council. And even we're trying to engage more with the Commission, which has a lot of the leadership and some of the resources to deal with supporting neighbors and building institutions and such things. But below the levels of the leaders, we're increasing engagement between our staffs, trying to both share information and deconflict what we're doing, which is sort of the minimum, but to go beyond that now and come up with a more concerted approach where we can develop a concept of how we can mutually reinforce each other, achieve more of a strategic effect in our programs to help the eastern neighbors, to help countries in North Africa. Now we're trying to see whether we can come up with a common approach to how we would support nations facing hybrid attacks. And we're looking at strategic communications. The key is the staffs can't make decisions that go very far. The nations are sovereign and they control things. So what we're doing, it's kind of a parallel universe, but we're trying to come up with common approaches and then ensure that they gain the necessary political support within each institution. And we do even have now, as I said, possibilities to have joint meetings, which can give even more impetus to this, particularly between the North Atlantic Council and the Political and Security Committee. So this is a complex process, but there's a lot more political will to do this and to apply more pragmatism rather than theology to the relationship between the two institutions. On strategic communications, NATO is probably a little bit ahead of the EU. We've been trying to debunk a lot of Russian disinformation. I hope you've seen our Setting the Record Straight Q&A packages, which seek to answer the most outrageous distortions and outright misrepresentations of the facts and of the NATO position. And I think the EU is looking to do similar things, and our experts are in regular contact. Whether we'll have a totally synchronized approach remains to be seen, but we're comparing expertise and trying to help raise the level of our game. The Center of Excellence you mentioned in Riga is an important asset, and we're very open to involvement of EU specialists in that institution, which is doing a very good job, first and foremost, of sort of dissecting and analyzing Russian disinformation and psychological operational techniques, and then determining how we can best counter this. Because the Russians have, as some have said, have almost weaponized information as part of the current hybrid strategy that they're pursuing against their neighbors and against our own countries. And so we need to treat this as the real threat that it is.
Thank you. Peter, please.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have an awful lot to add to what the ambassador just said, but just, I mean, there's a wide recognition that EU and NATO do play supplementary roles and need to be very coordinated in this. So looking at not just the information warfare, but the whole hybrid package, clearly NATO is leading on the military preparedness side, whereas many of the instruments are that could be used to counter sort of hybrid threats are actually EU instruments. But these instruments, in turn, we are not really used to seeing them as countering threats. Maybe they are countering organized crime or managing disasters, but it's sort of trying to get to grips with this whole hybrid threat issue, where I mean, we're working hard at it, but there's much more to be done. And on strategic communication in the EU, I literally don't know more than the fact that we've decided to do it, so I'm sure somebody's working on it. But maybe you know more about this.
No, what I hear is the staff-to-staff contacts are much better and improving, and we like that, and we welcome that, and encourage that. So I think that's the situation is worse enough to make them work, I think, because it's so difficult that you have to handle the situation. And on hybrid issues, I think it's foremost a national responsibility to prepare yourself and to counter the different areas. And in terms of propaganda, I think we have, with help of Russia's actions, increased our understanding and our level of analysis a lot the last year, on both European level and also on national level. So I
What about responses? I mean, the understanding is one thing, but what about
yeah, but you know, we work on different levels. We Nordic, Baltic. One example that I use is the joint article by the Nordic Defense Minister published in April to give a unified view from the 5 Nordic countries, 2 are partner nations, by the way, to NATO, but it doesn't matter because we show a shared analysis of what's happening, what actions by Russia, and our that we don't like that, and how our intentions to improve our cooperation. Is a very defensive act, but still I think it's very important to make such statements and show that we have another view of the world, and we present it clearly.
Is there a special Swedish capacity yet, or a particular
Well, it's a part of the defense bill to, I mean, we used to have a certain agency for psychological warfare or whatever it was called, but no, but it's the task is still there, and there's more emphasis and resources to that by the defense bill, so that will come, and exactly how and when I'm not.
We're all trying to use social media more.
But
I noticed a Twitter board on the at the entrance of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So Twitter is becoming one of the weapons for countering disinformation.
But we discuss this coordinated every national meeting, every international meeting I go to. So it's not that we're sitting on our hands and waiting for the next move. We're trying to be very active.
But yeah, we must go on. But just shortly, do you see any measures that could be taken in order to improve the relations and coordination between EU and NATO?
Well, the best thing that could happen would be for there to be a long-awaited political settlement in Cyprus. That would, and there's hopes after the recent elections in northern Cyprus that opportunities may exist. So I think NATO is just an observer of that, but it would certainly be a welcome step. And we wish Espen Barth Eide, who's the international mediator for the UN, every success. Short of that, I think we just have to continue to build on the pragmatism that's been developing in the last year and a half. There's nothing like a crisis to focus people on what's really important. And I think because of the high stakes in what Russia is doing to undermine the whole European security system, as well as the stakes in the breakdown of order in the south, that we recognize that we need each other. That neither of us has all the tools to deal with these problems, and we'll only really have a chance of success if we work together.
Okay, thank you. We will take two questions now at a time. Eva Halldén and then Robert Dalsjö. Right. Please, Eva.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for a very interesting introduction. And I'm afraid I'm going to be persistent and keep you on the topic of Russia, and more precisely on the topic of Vladimir Putin. And you yourself talked about that Mr. Putin is creating whatever, a false narrative. And we had the former question coming about counter propaganda. How do you actually counter it? And you talked about the NATO response. Now, without much further ado, it seems to me that we have sort of re-scrambled into the Cold War activity of trying to understand when to take Putin seriously, or when just sort of dismiss him as weaving these false narratives. I'm referring to the long interview in the Italian paper Corriere della Sera. I'm sure you're familiar with it, where Mr. Putin could develop on almost anything. And I'm going to quote from the article. On the topic of Russians' possible aggressive actions, future in whatever, Europe. Mr. Putin says, I think that only an insane person and only in a dream that Russia would suddenly attack NATO, full stop. Now, the trick here is, of course, it's very good to have counter-propaganda activities, but with statements like this, which are directed at different sort of targets, how do we know when to take Putin at face value, and how do we know when we can just dismiss him?
Thank you. And then Robert Dalsjö, please.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. For 20 years now, nuclear weapons have been largely absent from discussions on NATO and European security. But for the last couple of years, Putin has been brandishing and rattling the nuclear saber quite brazenly. This raises the issue of NATO's response, both as a signal, but also perhaps to shore up defense and deterrence of the Eastern allies. In Tallinn 6 weeks ago, you said that our postures and policies are currently under review. Could you expand on that?
Thank you. Please, Ambassador.
Okay. Well, when it comes to how do we interpret the statements of the Russian leader, at the end of the day, we have to judge him by his actions. I mean, clearly, we hope he was sincere when he said that only an insane person would believe that Russia would attack NATO, and I think NATO does have a very strong deterrent. I think there's a difference between NATO territory and sadly Ukraine or Georgia 7 years ago. I think Putin knows that even though he's been engaged in a very substantial military buildup for the last few years, and Russian forces are in much better shape, we have to admit, than they were at the time of the war in Georgia. At the same time, NATO has a lot of military capability, and we do have a nuclear arsenal as the ultimate deterrent. And so hopefully he is implicitly saying that he is deterred. But we can't be 100% sure anymore, based on what he has done in Ukraine. And the methodology that he used in Crimea, with this hybrid strategy and the little green men and staging local coup d'etat and fake referenda with bogus international inspections. And something similar could be tried, even just as a way of testing our resolve against members of NATO itself. So we have to ultimately ensure that we have a deterrent that's not only effective against direct aggression, but now against these other forms of covert, indirect, hybrid threats as well, and ultimately judge him by his actions. Same applies to the Minsk agreements in Ukraine, where he told Secretary Kerry, he says publicly, that the solution is the full implementation of the Minsk agreements. But at the same time, Russia denies that it has forces in eastern Ukraine, denies that it has control over the separatists, which is clearly in contradiction with everything we know. And more importantly, we've seen that the ceasefire, which was agreed at Minsk twice, first in September, and then it was agreed again in February, has still not been fulfilled. And the separatists bear primary responsibility for that. They never withdrew the heavy weapons. They haven't cooperated with the OSCE. So ultimately we judge him by his actions, and we strengthen our deterrent to ensure that he doesn't even think of testing NATO militarily. Now, as for the nuclear issues themselves, the second question, NATO has indeed, over the recent years, sought to develop its own doctrine with respect to nuclear deterrence, which would make the use of nuclear weapons increasingly remote, increasingly unlikely, while at the same time upholding that NATO is still a nuclear alliance, and the ultimate source of deterrence, if conventional deterrence fails, is the nuclear arsenal of the United States and the UK, plus the independent nuclear forces of France. We reviewed our posture in the run-up to our Chicago summit, and there was a judgment then in 2012 that the mix of forces that we have and the doctrine that we have to go with them, and that's the mix of nuclear, conventional, and missile defense, which has become more important, was sufficient. And thus far, no one is questioning whether that is the case. But we have seen, at the same time, Russia, as the questioner said, brandishing its nuclear weapons in much more threatening ways. And so we're now assessing Russian nuclear policy. And there may be proposals from allies, this is still at an early stage, not necessarily to change our posture, but maybe to increase the rate of our exercises, to consider our declaratory posture. But this is at a very early stage, and I want to emphasize that I think when you look at our overall deterrent, we have a strong mix of forces, conventional, nuclear, and missile defense, and we think that we can deter any external aggressor.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Folk och Försvar. My name is Jennifer, and I participated in the Defense and Security Academy here at Folk och Försvar this spring. And I'm curious about the people and the defense and the people and NATO. Is it possible to bring them together on these issues? Especially since we have had 200 years of peace in Sweden, and we have this strong commitment to the non-alignment. And maybe, Mr. Ambassador, you have some advice to your Swedish colleagues on how this can be done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bring together the Swedish people in NATO? Is that the question? Well, I don't know whether I should delve too deeply into your internal affairs. I think, I hope that people will learn more about what we're doing now between Sweden and NATO in terms of the partnership, the mutual benefits that come from that partnership in terms of capacity to address regional and global problems, the ability to bring Swedish forces up to the high standards and effectiveness levels that NATO forces enjoy, to train and exercise together, and to compare our political assessments of key crisis situations, both near and far. I think people aren't necessarily aware of that. I found that in my own country, that people have very little idea that NATO, which everybody loves in the United States, it's like motherhood and apple pie, as we say. But you say, well, did you know that NATO has partnerships with Sweden, or with Republic of Korea, or even now we're developing one with Colombia? They said, NATO? What do you mean partnership? What does that mean? So there's a lot of ignorance out there about how much partnership can benefit countries, and it's a two-way street. So that's what I would highlight. But I'll leave it to my Swedish colleagues to say more.
Would you like to add anything, Peter, Johan? No? Right, okay. Then we take the next question. Anna Wislander and then Anders Oljelund, please.
Thank you, Lena. Anna Wislander from the Swedish Institute of International Affairs. And I was just wondering about the NATO strategy that you took as late as 2010, as I believe, where Russia was considered not a threat, for instance, but more of a partner. And now things have changed quite rapidly. What is the NATO discussion on both concretely, how do you view Russia? Is Russia a threat? And how do you perceive the strategy you have? And will there be a strategy review coming up rather soon, perhaps in front of the Warsaw Summit next year? Thank you.
We bring in the next question as well, Anders Oljelund.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Lena asked what Sweden's biggest asset was, and somebody answered that it's our geography. And I think that's right, but it's also our disadvantage, it's our problem. And one of the dividing lines in Swedish defense, Swedish security discussion and NATO discussion now is how should we use this territory to make it a contribution to stability in our part of Europe. And that has been a discussion since always in Sweden. I don't expect you to tell us what the Swedish contribution should be these days, because that would be part of Swedish domestic policy, but maybe some philosophic discussion. What is stability today in the situation we have? What is stability in Northern Europe? And how do you contribute to stability in Northern Europe with a neighbor that we have all around us, including the one quoted in Messaggero recently?
Excellent. Thank you very much. Ambassador, please. Would you like to start with the strategy and
yeah, well, they're both tough questions, because yes. the first one is very much a subject that we are only beginning to look at as we prepare for the summit, which is still 13 months away in Warsaw in July of next year. The strategic concept is the name of the document that we approved in 2010. Does have a few paragraphs in it that speak of a European security environment which is peaceful and there's no threat of external aggression. So I think there's widespread recognition that those paragraphs are a bit out of date. But I think there's also a sense that the broader document and the analysis of the strategic environment, which focuses also on terrorism and extremism and proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and all these things, is still largely consistent with today's world. Maybe things have gotten even worse since 2010, but it's not qualitatively different. And also the recommendations flowing from that in terms of what should be the core tasks, which is the term used in the document. The core tasks of the alliance should be collective defense, crisis management, and cooperative security. There's a sense that those three remain valid as well, even though perhaps collective defense has risen a little bit above the other two. So whether there'll be a decision at the summit to revise that document, or whether there'll just simply be some other form of declaration addressing the latest judgments of our leaders on the strategic environment, I don't know. Those are questions still to be debated within the alliance. But I think there is certainly widespread recognition that the security environment is far more dangerous than it was in 2010, and that's why we're taking and implementing the decisions that we have regarding increasing the readiness of our forces and the capabilities to deal with outside aggression. On the second question, well, stability anywhere, of course, depends on maintaining respect for the rule of law and for principles in the UN Charter and in the Helsinki Final Act regarding peaceful settlement of disputes. And I think that, in turn, depends on ensuring that there's a balance of power vis-a-vis any potential aggressor. And I think that maintaining that situation here and in other parts of the world depends on all countries who share the same values and principles working together, whether they're members of the NATO alliance or whether they're partners of the NATO alliance. And I think some of the things that we do together in this region I think we'll do it at increasing frequency in the coming years in terms of maritime exercises and other training exercises here in the Baltic region will contribute to that balance of forces and to that to the deterrence that we need to encourage other countries to solve issues peacefully rather than through efforts to bully their neighbors.
And on the question if Russia is a threat, should we interpret it that yes?
Well, that's a tricky question. We have to look at what Russia is saying. Russia says that NATO they don't call us a threat, they call us a danger. And I think that clearly we see Russia as posing a threat to the security of its immediate neighbors, but I think we would probably say it's a potential threat to the alliance because we are confident that we have strong deterrence. We're going to make it even stronger and demonstrate with no ambiguity that we're capable of defending any ally through this rapid reaction force, the spearhead force, and all the forces that would flow in behind it if anyone were foolish enough to attack an ally. And we would like to go back to the days when Russia was a partner, but as I said in my remarks at the beginning, that seems a bit of a distant prospect.
Johan, would you like to add anything?
Just on the second question, I agree what the ambassador said on exercises. That is, and I tried to emphasize that earlier as well. And also the host nation support agreement that would take political decisions, but still you know you have the bureaucratic rules and procedures ready to act together if you decide so, and then that's basically the better circumstances than before.
Peter, would you like to add anything? No. Okay. Then I see
Wise
that we
man.
are running out of time, and I would like to thank Ambassador Verpo so much for taking the time to come here. I would also like to thank Peter Eriksson and Johan Lagerlöf, of course, also for contributing to an interesting discussion. The three of you will get a paperback book, as we always give to our speakers, of course. But first of all, a warm applause. Thank you.
Thank you very much.